Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening at the Traverse Area District Library. My name is Melissa McKenna. I'm the department head for adult services, which is the second floor. And so part of my job and my staff's job is to bring you wonderful programs like this. So please be sure to check out our upcoming events on tattle.org/events. And also, if there's anything else that you would like to see the library do or offer, please be sure to let me know. Okay, you can find me on the Tattle's website under staff, or you can catch me after the program. If you've got any suggestions, I would love to hear them. All right, so we're going to get started for this evening. I'm here to introduce to you Paul Sinclair, our artist for this evening and our speaker and presenter. Paul considers himself a nature and wildlife artist and photographer. He received his formal training from the Anderson University and Indiana University, where he obtained his master's degree. Along with his art, he spends a lot of time climbing mountains around the world. So far, he's been on Mount Everest, Mount Kilimanjaro, the North American Rockies, White Mountains on the east coast of the United States, the Appalachians, as well as 9 volcanoes in New Zealand and the foothills of Jamaica. He has photographs and art from these areas in many of these locations, and you can see a lot of that exhibited right here in this room this evening. So I hope you got a chance to take a look at those before, and if not, afterwards. In 2021, Paul retired from teaching in Indiana, and that was when he moved up here to Traverse City. During his 46-year-long teaching career, he taught kindergarten through college, subjects including 2- and 3-dimensional art, jewelry, ceramics, photography. So he spent much of his time teaching others this love of the art forms. You may have noticed that Paul's artwork is a French Impressionist technique called pointillism. Many of you probably have seen George Seurat's Sunday in the Park as the most famous example of that, these are just absolutely lovely. So Paul draws using these colorful dots. This process allows him to take as much time as he needs to complete the art, often 1,500 to 1,700 hours in one piece. And he finds this long haul creative process enjoyable and relaxing. It allows him to spend as much time as he needs with the art, and he's not in any rush to have it finished. I'm wondering if there's any parallels between that and hiking and mountain climbing, but I think we'll find out. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Paul Sinclair and ask him to come up and speak with us this evening. Thank you, Paul, for being here.
Thank you for adjusting your schedule so that you can come out to my exhibit. It's special for me to be able to share what I do. I feel pretty blessed that I've done these things considering how it all started off. So what I'll do is I'll give a little bit more profile information and then get into our presentation. So I'm originally from Chicago. I am the third of 8 siblings. And fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you want to interpret it, we came from a pretty impoverished background, but we came from some very, very, very powerful roots. My grandfather was a minister in the southern parts of the United States, the Carolinas and Georgia, and he was one of the Martin Luther King type preachers in the South. He started lots of churches. So during the Black Renaissance, my mom wouldn't say it was the Black Renaissance, she just said, I lived in the South and I was ready to get away from home. But it was during that period in which all the migration, or the large migration of Blacks started moving north. Her family were part of the sharecroppers. So as I do the math, my grandfather was born 15 years after slavery, which meant my uncles and aunts were sharecroppers doing the work that the free slaves did. And after a while, my mom just decided, you know, I'm done with that. And she went to Chicago. I don't know how the story started or any of that information because she was a little bit before me, but somehow we wound up at this particular church. And at this particular church, it was affiliated with the same congregation that my grandfather had been a part of. And because my grandfather was such a known pastor, I'm assuming that when my mom had a conversation with this pastor, he realized her financial situation and allowed us to live in the basement in the parsonage of the church. That was a good part. But the better part was he was like a grandfather. And because he was a grandfather, I remember he would drive us around in his, I think, 1954 Cadillac. And we were like his grandkids. As we got a little bit older, I'm going to say probably 6, 7, and 8, because my siblings are what we call the stair steppers. We moved to the Cabrini Green projects on the north side of Chicago. Now, when I talk about that, I have to put clarification there, because if you know Cabrini Green from modern times, you know how bad it was. We moved in when they were brand new. And if you looked at the Cabrini Greens when they were first built, they looked like any other middle-class skyscraper in Chicago. So that was what it was like when I was there. And as the stair steppers, my brothers, Andrew, the younger one, he was 6. My older brother, Neil, who was 8, and I was 7. Our mode of transportation was walking or riding our bikes. And because during that period of time, parents weren't so afraid of their kids being out and about, we had the opportunity, because we only lived about a mile and a half from the Gold Coast, which is the creme de la creme part of Chicago, we would walk downtown. We would also walk to the museums, as well as the train yards, and we had access to all of the parks. So we had this opportunity to spend a lot of time outside and independently. And with this, I didn't know at the time, by hanging out at the parks, that was the early stages of trekking, because you got wooded areas. And unlike, well, considering how far north we are, there are lots of places here that's pretty open and forestry, and you can get lost. Well, Chicago has pockets like that too. And we would spend time doing a lot of that trekking and having the fun of getting lost and exploring. I'm going to go ahead and fast forward now to the 1970s. While attending Anderson College, during my super young and dumb stage, I only sent out one college application. And fortunately, I was accepted. When I got to college, I realized that I was quite ill-equipped in regards to having skills necessary. I took no college prep classes, and I'm in a small private school where all of the professors know all of the students, which was a great thing because they taught me how to study and everything that I needed to know. But at the same time, our school offered mission trips, and my first mission trip was going to Jamaica. The one thing I loved about that trip was it was my first experience with foothills / little mountains. And on this one particular occasion that I can recall, I had gotten tired, not physically, just I don't want to do it anymore, trekking up and down the mountains. So on this particular occasion, I decided that I'm just going to stay down in the valley, look at the beautiful trees. We saw the orange trees, the grapefruit trees, the river, and a big giant-sized boulder. So I told my friends that, you know, I don't want to trek with you today. I'm just going to hang out on the down here, and when you get back, you know, we can join up again together. So I think I was on that boulder for 3 or 4 hours just enjoying it. Very quiet. And I heard a fluttering sound. And I looked up in the air and I saw that there was this flock of birds flying in a circle above my head. Now, I know from little boy days and watching an awful lot of cartoons that those were probably vultures. So I kept sitting, and then as I started watching the spiral, there was a bit of a dissension, and they were coming down. And I would say probably 10 to 15 feet above my head was when they decided that we're going to go ahead and land. And I remember in a straight line, because I guess maybe like the lion thing, they kind of like have like leaders, the bosses, the alphas. And they started walking toward me. And I remember jumping off the rock and jumping up and down, yelling and screaming, I'm alive, I'm alive. And much to their chagrin, they turned around and followed the little path and then walked their way back out again. So that was my first experience in regards to my international trips. Now, at the same time, going back to school, I'm taking art classes. And unfortunately, for me, many of the professors, as well as I would probably say from middle school through college, all of my professors would say, oh, you are very good at art. Why don't you work independently? So no one ever taught me anything. It was great because I was only doing what I had already been doing. I was only reinforcing whatever nothingness was there. And I remember by the time senior year came, oh, I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself. So I remember not having the skills that were necessary. I assessed myself in my intro art class that I classified me as being the third worst art student in my class. And I thought, you know, if you're this bad, there's only one place to go. You know, it's like, I'm not going to drop out. You're going to have to get better. So I would take my art notebook and I would walk around campus and I would look for, don't tell Mom, pretty girls on campus. And would you like to pose for me? Because I'd like to draw you. I'm working on my art degree. And because of that, I got pretty good. So by the time senior year came around, my professor came up, the department chair came up to me and said, Paul, I'd like to tell you that you are one of the most outstanding Black art students at this college. I paused. And I said, no, I am one of the most outstanding artists here. Because see, at that point, I had already had 4 one-man art shows along with whatever other exhibits during the course of 4 years. And because I knew that I made the mistake by going to this small college, as opposed to realizing I had been living downtown Chicago at the Art Institute with the world's best work. And I instantly realized in college that you had made a huge mistake. So every time I would have an opportunity to go back to Chicago, I would go back to the Art Institute and I would look at what I would have been doing had I been a student there. And I took that information to Anderson College in order to make sure that my skills were increasing. So now that we've done Jamaica, let's go ahead and we're going to fast forward to the early and mid 80s. For some of you, I told you individually that I was a tennis pro. I ran a private tennis business for 48 years. But the problem was Indiana didn't get the memo where I was living that he's a Black pro and he's looking for a teaching job. A lot of my workout partners had been pros at the racket clubs, and they would say, hey, Paul, there's a position at the racket club. You should go and apply for it because they need help. And I would go in and then there were the interrogation questions. And then they're saying, I'm sorry, but we don't have any positions available. And I said, okay. So at that point, I decided that I'll continue to play tournaments. I'll continue to coach the high school programs. But at the same time, I thought, you know, if they're not going to hire you, start your own business. So I started Sinclair Tennis Academy that I ran for 48 years. For 48 years running that program, my big step was when I was able to not get a job in Indiana, but the state of Maine hired me as the head tennis pro to run their camp. And I would drive across Canada in order to get to Maine because, I'm sorry, when you are finished with school on Friday and you have to be at work on Monday, you have to go a little bit above the speed limit. I'll just say that. But by traveling across Canada and going into Maine and New Hampshire, I discovered the White Mountains and part of the Appalachian Trail. And while teaching tennis in Maine, my friends would also take me, and we would do a lot of the climbing, and I became familiar with climbing a lot of the Appalachian, which again continued to develop and then merge into other mountains. So as Melissa stated, I visited, I think 43, 46 of the 50 states, but I've also looked at trekking many of those mountains from the East Coast of the United States and Canada, all the way across to the West Coast of the United States and Canada. And with that, not thinking that Everest or Kilimanjaro or any of that stuff was to follow, all I know was I had gotten an early start at becoming acclimated to the thinner air. So also in the late 80s, early 90s, my wife also attended the same schools that I attended, but as she would tell you if she were here tonight, we were there at different times because he's a lot older than me. So with that, when we first met, ironically, we were teaching at the same school. And I saw this beautiful person signing in, and I went up to her and I said, hey, who are you and what are you doing here? Because when you look at my colleagues and how they dressed and looking at her, there was a big contrast. So she mentioned that she had just got transferred there. And I remember asking her out for a date. I mean, gentlemen, I think you understand where I'm going. If she's pretty and above your level, okay, I'll leave it at that. So I was turned down 3 times, but she had a legitimate excuse. She said I had to go home and take care of my cats. And it actually turned out that because now that I know she's a cat lover, an outdoorsy person too, it made a lot of sense. But the interrogation was, we found out we had both attended the same universities and undergrads, and we were also working with Ball State University on our master's degrees. But she was in the geology sections, I was in art. And she received this phone call from one of her professors inviting her to Nepal. So I came home from teaching tennis, and she says, you're never gonna guess what happened today. I've just been invited to go to Mount Everest. I'd like to go to Mount Everest too. So it turned out that she was asking the professors, and they needed one more person in order to bring the total group cost down. So I was also included. I was the only artist, photographer with the geologists and the PhDs. But I was the oldest because I think I was 61 at the time, and I was the most fit. So once we were accepted, my workout program consisted of me carrying about 30 pounds of photography equipment as I worked on the treadmill on the highest angle and I would have a run, walk, sprint routine. And I would do that for hours. I would also get on the ladder. For those of you who know Jacob's ladder, as you step, it moves. And I would have my 30 pounds of photography equipment again, doing that. The first 2 minutes, the first time doing it without anything other than me, it killed me. But I was able to work up to an hour and a half on Jacob's ladder with all the photography equipment. So now we're in Nepal and we're getting settled in. And I remember just going from the first floor to the second floor and walking up the steps. It's like, this is like killing me. And it's like, wait a minute. If these steps, it's this bad now, what is it going to be like on the mountain? So we had a chance to meet our guide. His name was Mohan, sorry. And he came in, he looked at all of our equipment to make sure that we had all the equipment that we needed in order to be able to do the mountain. And he saw my photography equipment. He said, you can't bring all of that. I said, I didn't train to not bring all of this. So I went from 35 pounds to 30 pounds. And I was able to bring it. So once we were on the mountain, everything was going pretty well. And I was really enjoying the trekking. And for those of you who don't know, on the big mountains, your weakest person or slowest person is the leader, because that person is dictating the pace for everybody else. So because of that and the speed that they had, it allowed me to vacillate between the front and the back of the crowd in order to get my photographs, because I didn't know what to expect being in that environment in comparison to anything and other things that I had previously photographed. So with that, it gave me an opportunity to be able to photograph wildlife and a lot of the people, as well as the mountains. Now, let's talk about the mountain. Rule number 1, you can never go too fast. Rule number 2, the mountain dictates its own weather. You can have the most beautiful day and you can have a blizzard or anything in between blizzard and sleet. And then also, when you're on the mountain, you want to make sure that you do a lot of ascending and descending in order to raise the heart level and then lowering it. So each day as you're going higher, your body has already acclimated to whatever that next level is going to be. So the next day isn't going to be as bad as it would have been had you just continued to just stagger it as you are ascending. There were quite a few areas that were quite challenging. And I remember being at several thousand feet and walking on a ledge. The thinnest part of the ledge is about a foot. The fattest part of the ledge is about 14, 16, 18 inches. There were times when, if this is the side of the mountain, you would walk leaning into the mountain, keeping your weight on the inside. Because if you fell, you would rather bump into the mountain as opposed to across. That was the beginning of a little bit of the scare. On another occasion, it was only a few days later, because now that we have ascended and we're at the snow ice level, we're trying to walk up an incline. It would be equivalent to you on the expressway and you're walking up the side of the highway, the grassy part, to get up, but increase the angle. So as I am trying to walk forward, gravity is pulling me down. So no matter how much I'm trying to go to my left, gravity is dictating its own. So it got to the point that, I'm getting a little bit afraid, not of the fall, but the fall and the Glacier River. Because at the foot, there's the river. This is the beginning of, I should say, the middle of a 10-hour trekking day, which meant if it's in the middle of the day and you're soaking wet, you are soaking wet until whenever you stop that day. So I was able to extend my hiking stick out, and one of the guides would hold it, and then I was able to ascend up the hill. Unfortunately, my wife didn't have it so easily. And for each step that she was making, she was actually sliding feet downward. So I know this is a bad example, and I shouldn't use a correlation between some of the Nepalese chauffeurs and mountain goats, because as I'm slipping and sliding, they are walking on this thing like it's like they hit the beach. So my wife has 3 guides holding her as they helped her get back up on the mountain and on the shore, and we were okay. But that was probably the scariest thing that we had done, because it was more of the fear of falling into the river as opposed to anything else. So a little bit more about Everest, and then I'm going to go to New Zealand. So we are at the day of base camp. We are probably 2 hours away, and I'm really tired. I am not happy anymore. I am tired of this ascending. I am tired of I can't breathe, and I had been saving up my Snicker candy bars for energy. So I went into my backpack looking for my Snicker bars, and then all of a sudden, I touched something that was extremely hard. It did not feel like a Snicker bar. I opened up my pack and I looked, and I found out that geologist's wife had been collecting rocks and putting them in my backpack. I am thinking each day that, being the older person in the group, that I'm not as fit as I thought I was, and that I was just getting tired and being consumed and done in by elevation, you know, that 30% less oxygen. And I remember going to my wife, and for those of you, oh, except for the kids over here, and I just saw the movie again a couple days ago. How many of you remember I Love Lucy, Lucille Ball and Ricky? And they are in the new car, driving up the mountain, pulling the new trailer, and all of a sudden, it can't go any further. And Ricky gets out, goes to the trailer, looks in, and then realizes that Lucy has been storing rocks. My wife has been stealing rocks from all over the world. And so it did not surprise me when I realized that, oh, the rocks are there. So now we are within an hour or so of base camp. I'm really tired, and time passes a little bit more slowly. And then I hear everyone in our group yelling and screaming and kissing and hugging. And I said, what's going on? I don't see anything that's exciting. We were at base camp. And it's like, oh. And by then, you are so exhausted, but only moments later did you realize, for a lot of the people that started out the same day as you aren't there with you, and that you made it, you accomplished your goal. Now, let's kind of go back to that going up the mountain. We were fortunate in that our sponsor had a great relationship with the people in Nepal, because Ball State University and her group had been donating money to that country, and somehow became in relationship with our guide and his business. So because of that, we didn't have to sleep in tents. We actually slept in houses, many people's houses. There's a good part, bad part about that. Number one, they only have electricity a few hours of the day because they're buying electricity from India, which means once the shutdown time comes, there's no electricity. If you get up in the middle of the night, you'll notice that your water bottle is frozen. If you have to go to the restroom, and then I will talk about that on the rated G level as opposed to the PG or the X version. But you'll get to the restroom and then realize that it is as cold in the place where you're staying as it is outside. And the water that you would have had to use to pour into the toilet to flush it, everything is frozen. There was a lot of elevation sickness for people, so there was a lot of vomit. That was bad. The good part was if there was just an outhouse or if there was just a hole in the floor, that was pretty good because at least everything went down the hole. And again, on the mountain, there are no restrooms. The rule is when you see someone leave the line, you don't look back. I remember, it was one of those occasions, and you always are trying to remember where you saw the last boulder and how far you've gone when you saw that boulder, because there's nothing in front of you that looks big enough that you might want to stop there. So I'm going back to my boulder, and all of a sudden you're looking to see if anyone's coming, and then it's like, oh, where did they come from? As you're doing what you have to do, I am really sorry. I am so sorry, but everybody had the same problem. It just happened to be your time then. So that was one of the peculiar things about the mountain. The other part about the mountain that I love was watching the yaks. And if you take in consideration, for those of you who are retired, when you used to go to work and the traffic jams that you face going to work, think of a yak traffic jam. And it could be one person with 100 yaks, and there are only two people, one at the front of the group of the yaks, one at the back, and they are the most disciplined animals. It's unbelievable. The yaks know that they walk on the edge of the mountain. And if you, the human, forgot where you were, the yaks aren't going to go around you. The yaks are going to stay in the same area. And there are a little bit of confrontations in regards to, oh, I forgot to move, but the yaks keep on going. Now, let's go ahead and we're going to go to New Zealand. New Zealand was a fun trip. It was a crazy trip because you are on both active and inactive volcanoes. Again, I'm with geologists from the same university. We were invited again to go on another trip. And when you first get off the boat at the island, and it's called White Island, it used to be for mining of sulfur. Back, I think it closed down in 1953. So if you look around, you'll see remnants of the place, and anything that could have continued to be around, any type of metal material, you can see what the acidic air did in regards to creating the rust. But when you get off the ship, the people on the island will put you in a group, give you gas masks, and let you know that you're on an active volcano and that there was some disturbance yesterday. And we just hope that we don't have any disturbance or eruptions today. Now, what I didn't mention earlier about the photography part, my cameras have their own brains. And I try to be as disciplined as I can possibly be in doing what I feel that I need to do and staying away from harm and danger. But my cameras will lead me into harm and danger, and it says, you have to go over here in order to get this particular photograph. So with New Zealand, wherever I saw something that was completely different from anything I had ever experienced before, because I felt as though I was on a planet, something not Earth-like because of the terrain. You would see seepage of sulfur smoke or steam, I should say, that's as low as 6 inches to as high as a mountain and anything in between. So where I would see plumes, and if you look at some of these photographs here, you'll see what I'm talking about. I would go into a lot of those places because I needed to get, quote, the shot. Every shot that I take is as if I'm shooting for National Geographics. So by doing that, it takes me to places that oftentimes I'm in trouble and they send a policy out, where is Paul, where's that photographer person? Because he's gotten away from us. So if you remember, I mentioned, oh, I didn't mention that, but my wife and I have been married for 37 years. So this past year, for our anniversary, wifey decided that she didn't want to go out for dinner, but she wanted to watch a video. The video happened to be a volcano. And I was really excited because I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, maybe this is another trip that we can do in the future. But as I looked at the video, I started realizing this looks very familiar because I took about 8,000 photographs in New Zealand. And then as the movie continued, I started noticing the people having burns. And I'm thinking, why is this? What's going on here? Then it turned out that these were the survivors that lived through the 2019 eruption. What they had done to put this video together was they took cell phones of the deceased and the survivors, and they were able to piece together by the minute the progression of the eruption. I have never been so hurt in my life because having taken as many photographs, as I'm looking at this video, I know exactly where everything was. And then when they told me in the video that they had rescuers going back and forth trying to rescue the people, and the government had already told the island that we can't have any more people coming in to help rescue you. When they said there were 8 people that we can't get because we have to leave now, we have to save those people that we have. And they said it'll be 3 days before the ash subside enough to be able to send a rescue group back. Where they found the last 8 bodies was in an area that I had photographed, and I knew there was no chance for them to survive. What they showed was, if you look at, again, the seepage, starting at 6 inches, they were able to show the people on the island looking at that little seepage and saying, oh, this is really pretty. And you can see the people in the group turning around to photograph it. But within seconds, that little seepage, which was at the time very, very white, grew and had more of a force. Almost, only thing I can compare it to would be in the old days when your radiator went off and it's blowing out steam. So at this point, as it started going from a very white to a degree change of gray to black smoke, that's when the people realized that things were really bad. So that first group might have been, I would say, from where we're here to the road there, and they were able to run and get into the water. Anyone from further back, it was to what degree of burns, because you're looking at a humid type of environment that is at boiling temperature. The island no longer allows tourists, but to look at having actually been at a place only 2 years earlier, hearing the same thing that I know those people heard, this is an active volcano. There has been some disturbance. We just hope that it doesn't erupt today. Okay, I'm gonna deviate from my notes and I'm gonna go with question and answers. Is that okay? Yes. The biggest lens is a could have one lens, and I think I had 2, maybe 3 35 millimeter cameras, and some shorter wire.
Curious about the and how you got started.
I'm so glad you asked that question. Remember I told you I was the 3rd worst in my intro art class? I was introduced to pointillism. I had never heard of pointillism. I didn't know anything about why anybody would want to draw with dots. That is so stupid and it's going to take so long. So my first year of teaching, at the end of the school year, I was 1 project short to have my students working to end the semester. So I thought, hey, remember that pointillism project? Why don't you have them do that? Because that'll allow you to finish the school year. But at the same time, whatever projects I gave my students, I did it myself because I wanted my students to respect me as an artist and a teacher, as opposed to a teacher that just happened to like art. But I wanted my students to know too that by working hard at it, it could be something with you. So in 1976, I did it as a final project, but I also did a project that I liked. And as I started that, it just continued to grow. And I did at least 1 pointillism drawing from 1976 up to, what year did I move to? 2021. That moving year was the gap year that I didn't get a chance to get a drawing in. Yes.
That's pretty intense, and to be able to say you have a vision, to lay it out, and have that patience.
Yeah, and there's another word that you threw in there that I have to talk to that word first. Bravery. I don't think I'm a brave person. I have kids. And when you take your kids and they're doing strange things, they don't realize that there is a danger factor in it. They just think that it's just what you do. So when we took our 2 sons to Alaska when they were 1.5 years and 2.5, they're in backpacks, we're in Denali, Here we go again. Remember I told you what that camera has its own brain? We're looking for grizzly, wolves. And when you go to Denali, you can go out on a bus trip for 2, 4, or 8-hour trips. So we have the 2 babies in backpacks doing 8 hours with no weapons out there alone. And we did see the grizzly, the timber wolf, and I'm trying to remember what other predator we saw, but we did see them. So the bravery thing, I never thought I was brave until I asked the family. I said, who's the bravest one in the family? Because I thought it was my oldest son. And my wife said, you. And I said, wait a minute, I don't think so. And she said, I do what I do because I know you're going to protect us. Which means, I think it goes back to that stupidity thing. You know, you don't have normal people going to stalk a grizzly. So we're in Vancouver and we found out that there was a grizzly in the neighborhood. So the family they've all taken off to go to hike a trail. So there's a photograph of me sitting at my tent with the fire in front of me. My axe is in the firewood over on this side. My knife is in firewood there, and I'm holding the camera. And I had been trekking back and forth looking for a grizzly. And it's like, what are you going to do with the grizzly when he comes up to you and you just got a camera? So, you know, it does. Maybe that's the talk that I'll have now that I live here in Traverse City to find out about this crazy. Okay, because I find myself in harm's way a lot. And I'm still here. Any other questions?
Water there.
There's a secret to what I do. So let's look at this yellow flower right there. How many colors do you see? No, just on the bud part. You see 5? Okay. There are probably at least 7 to 10 different colors there. And what happens is you start with your lightest stone and then you layer it. The thing about pointillism, what works is it's an optical illusion. When you paint, what you're doing is you are blending and mixing your colors. With pointillism, your eyes mix the color. So what you do is, if I need a green, I'll put a yellow and a blue, and then depending on how I space it, your eyes will mix the colors. So what takes so long is, if I only use, for instance, a green for that, a brown for this, or whatever, it would be equivalent to having done one drawing. So that drawing in essence would be like 6 different drawings that's been stacked on top of each other. I think this is the latest one we did, and I didn't even talk about this. This is from Kilimanjaro, and I'm thinking that we're right at about 700-800 actual work hours from start to finish. What I do is I'll look at an area. I look at light in a lens size, and everything that I do, I take a mental photograph. And then, once I take my mental photograph, or in this case, that's an actual place, I'll take a photograph of it. I'll sketch it out in pencil to get the marking and the layout down. And then I'll go back in and then use whatever color to express it the way that I want. The thing that I loved about this, it was 2021 that we climbed Kilimanjaro, and this was a waterfall in an area by a coffee farm. And it was so interesting because that little hut over on the right-hand side is where we had lunch. And you are looking at this most beautiful terrain, but you're also looking at the primitive makeshift hut-ish place that we had for yes, ma'am.
So when you do, is the style restricted to certain colors? For the dots, or where do you restrict yourself? Like, because you were talking about, to make green.
I can, and I do,
Oh,
but it's like, if I didn't have a theme tonight exhibiting my work, if you saw the first pointillism or the second pointillism I did in 1976, you'll see that many of those were monochromatic. And then two, if I am doing a red apple, the apple was just red. And then I would go with various shades to show light and shadow. But over the decades, what I've done is I've learned to manipulate what I've already learned. And then I can change and make my own rules because of what I've learned from the past. So I can do a whole bunch differently as opposed to what I've done before. I don't have one of my more difficult pieces, which is called what I call a superimposed transparency. So those are 3 different drawings all on one, but each one is working separately as well as they work collectively. When I do one of those superimposed transparencies, what I have to tell my brain is whatever I have to put down first is going to be light, because when I put the second one on top, it has to be a little bit darker. And then when I put the last one on, it's on the top. And then I have to go back into it to balance it out so that you still see all 3, but you see it collectively as opposed to individually, if that makes sense. It's a matter of just telling the brain that I just have a clean slate each time I add a different theme to it.
Are you working on any pictures from omission?
That's a very good question because I haven't shared with anyone outside of my family what is probably my next drawing. It's not omission, but it's going to be probably municing and ice climbing. Remember I told you something about that bravery thing? Well, I never had any intention of ice climbing until our son said, Mom and Dad, you're gonna go ice climbing. So again, I've taken thousands of photographs there, and I think my next drawing is gonna have something to do with the ice. And then there's a good possibility that the following drawing is gonna be omission.
Yes.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for coming out. And I hope I was able to share information with you that was enlightening so that your time was worthwhile for yourself. Thank you.